China joined the WTO in 2001, and Chinese manufacturing exploded. By 2010, China produced more steel than the entire rest of the world combined. They made everything: textiles, electronics, bought machinery, tools, furniture, at prices American factories couldn't match. The Rust Belt hemorrhaged jobs. Manufacturing employment fell from 19 million in 1980 to 11 million by 2010. 8 million jobs gone. And these weren't replaced with equivalent jobs. A factory worker making $60,000 per year loses their job. They end up in retail making $25,000. If they're lucky, towns died. Youngstown fell from 170,000 people to 60,000. The steel mills demolished or abandoned. Gary, Indiana fell from 175,000 to 69,000. Entire city blocks abandoned. Flint, Michigan, auto industry collapsed. Population fell 50%. Akron, rubber industry gone. Buffalo, manufacturing gone. These cities became symbols of industrial death. High unemployment, poverty, drug epidemics, opioids hit the Rust Belt hardest because people with no hope, no jobs, no future turned to drugs. Factories that employed thousands became empty ruins or demolished entirely, leaving vacant land. The lesson of the Rust Belt: when manufacturing leaves, it takes entire communities with it, and the jobs never come back. 3 examples: Britain, Detroit, the Rust Belt, all followed the same 5-stage pattern. And now the entire United States is following it, too. Let's break down the pattern because it's identical every time. Stage 1. Manufacturing dominance. Technological lead. Britain in 1850, Detroit in 1950, the Rust Belt in 1970, America overall in 1950 and 1970. In each case, they were the best, most efficient, most advanced, most productive, and that success made them complacent. Stage 2. Competitors emerge, copy technology and prove it. Germany and America copied Britain, Japan copied Detroit, China copied the Rust Belt. Every time the competitors studied the leader, took what worked, improved it, and added lower labor costs, and the leader dismissed them. They can't match our quality. They'll never catch up. Wrong every time. Stage 3. Market share declines. Offshoring begins. Britain lost market share to Germany and America by 1900. Detroit lost market share to Japan by 1980. The Rust Belt lost market share to China by 2000. And the response: instead of innovating, cut costs. Instead of investing, move production to cheaper locations. This accelerates the decline. Stage 4. Factory closures accelerate. Jobs vanish. Britain in the 1930s, 1950s, Detroit in the 2000s, the Rust Belt from 2000 to 2020. When the factories close, they don't reopen. The workers don't get equivalent jobs. The communities collapse. In America overall, we're here right now. Since 2000, America has lost 5 million manufacturing jobs. Factories have closed across the country. We now import $800 billion more than we export. Stage 5. Complete industrialization, economic dependency. Britain reached this by 1950. They import almost everything. Detroit reached this by 2013. The auto industry is gone from the city. The Rust Belt reached this by 2020. The steel is made in China. The goods are made in Asia and the United States. We're entering stage 5 right now. Let's look at where America is. We are in stage 4, entering stage 5. Manufacturing as a share of GDP has fallen from 28% in 1950 to 11% today. Manufacturing employment fell from 19 million in 1980 to 13 million today. Even though the population nearly doubled, we've lost the capability to manufacture at scale. We can't make our own pharmaceuticals. 80% of the active ingredients in American drugs are made in China or India. During COVID, we couldn't make masks, ventilators, or PPE. We had to import from China. We can't make our own electronics. iPhones are designed in California, but every component is made in Asia. We don't have the supply chains or workers to make them here. We can't make our own steel. We import more steel than we make. China produces 1 billion tons per year. The US produces 80 million. We're dependent. We can't build ships. China builds 40% of the world's ships. America builds less than 1%. Our Navy relies on ships built abroad. We can't make advanced semiconductors. Taiwan makes 90% of the world's advanced chips. If China takes Taiwan, we lose access to the chips that run everything. Cars, weapons, computers, everything. We've hollowed out our manufacturing base, and replacing it would take decades and trillions of dollars. If it's even possible, because the knowledge is gone. The workers who knew how to run the factories have retired or died. The supply chains have moved to Asia. The machinery has been sold or scrapped. You can't just flip a switch and restart American manufacturing. We've lost 50 years of capability. And the economic consequences are catastrophic. Trade deficit of $800 billion per year. We import $800 billion more than we export. That's $800 billion per year leaving the country, never to return. No middle-class jobs. Manufacturing jobs paid $60,000, $80,000 with benefits. Service jobs pay $30,000. $40,000 with no benefits. The middle class has been destroyed. Economic dependency on China. China can cut us off from pharmaceuticals, electronics, manufactured goods. They have leverage over us. We have no leverage over them. National security vulnerability. If war comes with China, we can't manufacture the weapons we need. We don't have the industrial capacity. China does. Stage 5 is complete deindustrialization, and we're almost there. 5 more years at the current pace, and American manufacturing will be functionally dead. We'll be a service economy, finance, tech, entertainment, but we won't make anything, and service economies don't sustain superpowers. Manufacturing does. Britain learned that. They went from superpower to secondary nation when they lost manufacturing. America is learning it now. 3 manufacturing powerhouses, Britain, Detroit, the Rust Belt, all followed the 5-stage pattern of industrial death. All thought they were too dominant to fail. All dismissed their competitors. All chose short-term profits over long-term capability, and all lost everything. The factories closed, the jobs disappeared, the communities died, and none of them ever recovered. America is in stage 4, 1 stage away from one stage away from total economic dependency on China. 1 stage away from losing the industrial base that made us a superpower. And here's the cruelest truth. Once you lose manufacturing, you never get it back. Britain hasn't rebuilt their industrial base in 75 years. Detroit hasn't recovered in 50 years. The Rust Belt is still dying 40 years later. The pattern says once stage 5 is complete, it's permanent. 3 warnings, 3 identical collapses, 3 examples of what happens when nations stop making things, and America is following the exact same path. The only question is timing. How long until stage 5 is complete? Maybe 5 years. Maybe it's already happened and we just haven't admitted it yet. But the math says we're 1 stage away from permanent decline. If this opened your eyes to what we've lost and where we're headed, subscribe, because when stage 5 is complete, when America can't make anything anymore, you'll want to understand how we got here and why we never saw it coming. The answers aren't hiding in the future. They're written in the rust and ruins of Britain, Detroit, and the Rust Belt. And I'll show you where to. In 1850, Britain produced over 50% of the world's iron, coal, and textiles. They built the railways that connected continents, the ships that dominated the seas, the factories that powered global industry. British engineering was so advanced that other nations bought British machinery, hired British engineers, and copied British methods just to compete. By 1950, Britain couldn't make steel at competitive prices. Their textile mills had closed, their shipyards were silent. The factories that once employed millions sat empty, and Britain, the nation that invented the Industrial Revolution, became an importer of manufactured goods from Germany, America, and Japan 100 years, from producing half the world's manufactured goods to buying everything from former imitators. The workshop of the world became a post-industrial shell dependent on finance and services. And they never recovered, not in 75 years, because once you lose manufacturing, you never get it back. Right now in 2025, the United States is following Britain's exact timeline. We're 170 years behind them on the same path. Factory closures, market share losses, importing from competitors we used to dominate. And we're in stage 4 of the same 5-stage pattern that destroyed Britain's industrial base forever. And Britain wasn't alone. In 1950, Detroit was the richest city in America, the automotive capital of the world. And by 2013, Detroit was bankrupt. Before we go through the pattern, you need to understand what manufacturing actually means for a nation's power. Not in abstract economic terms. In practical reality, manufacturing isn't just about making things, it's about technological capability. It's about supply chain resilience. It's about national security. It's about middle-class jobs that support families and communities. When you make things, you employ engineers who innovate. You train workers who develop skills. You build supply chains that create entire ecosystems of supporting industries. A car factory doesn't just employ auto workers. It employs steel suppliers, parts manufacturers, tool makers, logistics companies, engineers, designers. One factory job supports 5 other jobs in the community. When manufacturing thrives, the middle class thrives because factory jobs pay well. You don't need a college degree. You don't need to go into debt. You learn on the job. You earn a good wage. You earn a good wage. You raise a family. You build wealth. That was the American dream, built in factories. But when manufacturing dies, all of that dies with it. The jobs disappear, the skills are lost, the supply chains move overseas, and you can't get them back, because once you lose manufacturing capability, once the factories close and the workers retire and the knowledge disappears, rebuilding takes decades, if it's even possible. And in every case, every single time a nation loses its manufacturing base, they never recover. They become dependent on other nations to make their goods, on other nations for their technology, on other nations for their security. Manufacturing is power, and losing it is national suicide. Let's look at how it happened 3 times before and why it's happening again. Let's go back to Britain, the full story of how the workshop of the world became an industrial graveyard. In 1850, Britain was the undisputed workshop of the world. The Industrial Revolution had started there in the 1760s, and by 1850 Britain dominated global manufacturing. It produced over 50% of the world's iron, over 50% of the world's coal, over 40% of the world's manufactured goods. British textiles clothed the world. British steel built railways across continents. British ships carried global trade. British factories were the most advanced on Earth. This is Stage 1. Manufacturing dominance, technological lead, unmatched production. Britain had every advantage. They invented the steam engine, the power loom, the Bessemer steel process, railways, telegraph, all British innovations. They had coal and iron ore deposits. They had access to global markets through their empire. They had capital to invest. And they had the skilled workers who knew how to make things. Britain was so dominant that they practiced free trade because no one could compete with them. Why have tariffs when you're winning? But dominance never lasts, because success breeds imitators. Stage 2. Competitors emerge. Copy technology. Improve on it. In the mid-1800s, Germany and the United States started industrializing. They studied British methods. They bought British machinery. They hired British engineers. And then they improved on everything. Germany invested heavily in technical education. They created engineering schools that trained workers better than Britain's apprenticeship system. German companies like Krupp and Siemens innovated in steel and electrical engineering. By 1900, Germany was producing more steel than Britain. The United States had natural advantages. Britain lacked vast resources, oil, bigger domestic market, and American entrepreneurs like Carnegie and Rockefeller built industrial empires using the latest technology. By 1900, the United States was producing more steel than Britain and Germany combined. This is Stage 3. Market share declines. Competition intensifies. Today, Britain imports almost everything. They can't make their own steel at competitive prices. They close their last coal mines. They import manufactured goods from China, Germany, Asia. The lesson of Britain: once you lose manufacturing dominance, you never recover. Technology moves on. Competitors surpass you, and being first means nothing when others do it better and cheaper. But Britain was an old empire. Maybe a single city, a concentrated industrial base could hold on better. Detroit proved that wrong. Let's jump to 1950. Detroit, Michigan, the Motor City. In 1950, Detroit was the richest city in America per capita. It was the center of the automotive industry. Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, the Big Three, all headquartered there. Between them, they employed 250,000 workers directly in Detroit and hundreds of thousands more in supporting industries. Parts suppliers, tool and die makers, steel plants, rubber factories, the entire automotive supply chain. This is Stage 1. Manufacturing dominance, single industry specialization. If you lived in Detroit, you worked in the auto industry or for someone who did, and the pay was incredible. UAW union jobs paid $25 to $30 per hour in today's dollars, plus benefits, health insurance, pensions, job security. A high school graduate could get a factory job, buy a house, support a family, and retire comfortably. This was the American dream realized. Detroit's population hit 1.8 million in 1950. The highest per capita income in the nation. They built a highway system. Suburbs expanded. Downtown had theaters, department stores, restaurants. The city was booming, but dominance made them complacent. Stage 2. Competitors emerge. Improve on the model. In the 1960s and 1970s, Japanese automakers entered the US market. Toyota, Honda, Nissan. At first, Americans dismissed them. Small, cheap, low-quality cars. But the Japanese improved rapidly. They studied American manufacturing and made it better. They invented lean manufacturing, just-in-time inventory, Kaizen continuous improvement, and they built better cars, more reliable, more fuel efficient, cheaper to maintain. When the 1973 oil crisis hit and gas prices spiked, American muscle cars became undesirable. People wanted fuel efficiency, and Japanese cars delivered. The Big Three kept building the same cars: large, inefficient, unreliable. They assumed American consumers would always buy American. They were wrong. Stage 3. Market share declines. Offshoring begins. By the 1980s, Japanese automakers had 30% of the US market. The Big Three were hemorrhaging market share, and their response was to cut costs. They closed factories in Detroit and moved production to cheaper locations: Tennessee, Mexico, anywhere wages were lower. Detroit's auto employment fell from 250,000 in 1952, 100,000 by 1990, and it kept falling. Stage 4. Factory closures accelerate. Jobs vanish. The 2000s were catastrophic for Detroit. The 2008 financial crisis nearly killed GM and Chrysler. Both went bankrupt. The government bailed them out, but the Detroit factories never reopened. Ford survived without a bailout, but they closed Detroit plants. Let's look at the American Rust Belt, 1970 to 2020. The Rust Belt is the industrial heartland of America: Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin. In the 1970s, this region produced the steel, the machinery, the goods that built America. Pittsburgh was the steel capital. Cleveland made steel and machinery. Youngstown was steel. Gary, Indiana was steel. Akron was rubber. Buffalo was manufacturing. Stage 1. Manufacturing dominance across multiple industries. In 1970, the United States produced 20% of the world's steel. U.S. Steel alone employed 300,000 workers. Bethlehem Steel employed 165,000. Republic Steel, LTV Steel, dozens more. Millions of workers in steel mills and supporting industries. These were good jobs, union jobs. $30, $40 per hour in today's dollars. Benefits, pensions. You could graduate high school, get hired at the mill, and retire 30 years later with a full pension. Towns were built entirely around the mills. Youngstown, Ohio had a population of 170,000 in 1970, built around steel, but the rest of the world was catching up. Stage 2. Competitors emerge using modern technology. In the 1970s, Germany, Japan, and South Korea built new steel mills using the latest technology: electric arc furnaces, continuous casting, more efficient than the old American blast furnaces, and they had done lower labor costs. American steel workers earned $25 per hour. Korean steel workers earned $3 per hour. The math was brutal. By 1980, American steel was uncompetitive. Cheaper to import foreign steel than make it domestically, and American steel companies, instead of modernizing, lobbied for tariffs and cut costs. Stage 3. Market share declines. Offshoring begins. Through the 1980s and 1990s, American steel plants closed. First the least efficient, then the old integrated mills. Companies went bankrupt. U.S. Steel cut employment from 300,000 to 50,000. Bethlehem Steel went bankrupt in 2001. LTV Steel bankrupt in 2000. Republic Steel gone. Entire companies erased. And it wasn't just steel. Manufacturing across the Rust Belt collapsed. Textiles moved to China. Electronics to Asia. Machinery to Mexico. NAFTA in 1994 accelerated the offshoring. Companies could move factories to Mexico, pay workers $2 per hour instead of $25, and import the goods tariff-free. Thousands of factories moved. Stage 4. Factory closures accelerate. Jobs vanish. The 2000s were the final blow.